Providence Oncology Nutrition Services, we offer registered dietitian consults for any patient that is interested. We do routine screening of all of our patients to identify malnutrition risk. We monitor that on an ongoing basis. We help to provide nutrition education during treatment, but also for survivorship as well. And the primary goal of our nutrition services and nutrition staff being available to our patients is to help prevent delays in cancer treatments, to improve the side effects of treatment, to prevent malnutrition, and to just recover faster between treatments, and to be a resource. Those dietitian visits are provided at no cost to our patients, and we offer them at most of the oncology centers in the Oregon region. Some of them are done virtually. So that is a little bit about our Cancer Institute and the dietitians. Today, we're going to kind of switch gears now and focus on what we want to talk about today. So objectives for today are listed here. We're going to look at what is the most current research regarding cancer prevention and recurrence through diet, and what does the research show about a traditional Asian diet. We're also going to determine the best diet for you as an individual before, during, and after cancer treatment, and how can you determine that. And then understand appropriate use of supplements in prevention and during treatment of cancer. So how do we, what supplements are safe and what ones have been shown to be effective? The first thing that we're going to evaluate, though, is where the Asian population differs from the general population in terms of risk for specific types of cancer. So this slide, and I apologize that it's maybe a little bit difficult to read those numbers, they're pretty small. But this is a slide of incident and mortality rates for selected cancers by race and ethnicity. This is from the American Cancer Society. And on the top half of the chart, you can see the highlighted numbers, which show two cancer types in particular where Pacific Islander Asian populations have a higher percentage of incidences, meaning more people per population have this type of cancer than the average incidence rate for all ethnicities, races, combined. The two cancer types that stand out in this population, as you can see, are the liver and intrahepatic bile duct cancers. And this is true for both male and female, as well as stomach, or what we would refer to as gastric cancers, again, for male and female. And you can see over on this far left column, the all race ethnicity averages. The bottom, the bottom half of the screen shows that they also have a higher rate of mortality than all races, ethnicities average combined, for those same two types of cancer. And so we today, when I am talking, I have really focused specifically on some of the correlation to those cancers in specific, because they are higher incidences among the Asian population. But I will say that there are, as we go through the presentation, you will hear recommendations for all cancer types as well. So is there a role of nutrition in risk of cancer development? So primary risk factors are listed here for both the liver bile duct cancers on the left and then the stomach gastric cancer on the right. A couple of notes here. So you can see that the long-term infection with Hep B or hepatitis C virus is a independent risk factor. Cirrhosis, which can be from a number of reasons. So a lot of times we'll automatically associate cirrhosis with alcohol intake, but liver cirrhosis can also be a product of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which we see in obesity, as well as an autoimmune disorder that causes biliary, affects the biliary tract and causes cirrhosis. The last one on here is aflatoxins. And this is a fungus that contaminates peanuts, wheat, soybeans, corn, and rice. It's really common in tropical, less developed countries. It is only prolonged exposure is a risk factor. And in developed nations, including in the United States, products are routinely tested for the presence of this, so that we should not have exposures to this in developed nations. The other side is the gastric cancer. So the rate of H. pylori infection so I will start by saying H. pylori is an infectious organism, and H. pylori is found in most human beings' stomach lining. Their gastric lining has some level of H. pylori. We tend to not have infection. It doesn't always cause infection. However, it has been noted that in Asian populations, there is a genetic predisposition to higher levels of H. pylori and more acute infections from H. pylori. This has been decreasing over the past few decades due to early detection and surveillance. But it is just an important thing. We'll see in the next slide for some information on that. The other things are high intake of salty and smoked foods, high intake of well-done meat products. So, you can't really see that, but above 180 degrees, 350 degrees Fahrenheit and it says longer periods of time, I would consider this to the well done stage. So when there is no pink left, you have probably done this and it had this be an issue. So there are compounds that are created at high heat during smoking called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon and I'm going to mispronounce this, benzopyrenes, and they form and at high intakes, they can be carcinogenic, meaning they can be cancer causing. And again, I say this, I say this somewhat reluctantly in the sense that high intake is a very ambiguous, non-well-defined term. I will show you later on in the presentation what the American Institute of Cancer Research recommends as far as intake of these meats are what is recommended and what is not. I would say that there is research to show inverse relationship between high intakes of smoked meats and increased risk of developing gastric cancer. And then the last one is large amounts of pickled vegetables. And the biggest issue with pickled vegetables is that they produce a compound known as a nitroso compound that is by molds or fungi that are present in these products. And again, they are naturally occurring. They are not something that is being tested for, like the aflatoxins. So again, another potential risk factor. Here are some, this is from a study that it was evaluating frequency of salted food intake and risk of gastric cancer development. And you can see that the graph shows that there's a relative risk for development of gastric cancer for men, and that's on the top here. These two are for the top. I know that this one's A, this one's B. and then on the bottom for women. And frequency of intake. So for salted fish roe, graphs A for men and C for women, you can see that the greater the number of days per week of intake, the higher the relative risk of developing gastric cancer. And anything that has a little asterisk next to it is a significant result. Meaning that it's significantly higher than the control. And then on this side, the other side is looking at salted fish preserves. And again, the greater the intake, the higher the risk, relative risk in those populations. This is another study, and it shows frequent intake of pickled vegetables and daily consumption of miso soup, and I hope that you guys can all see this okay, is associated with increased risk of H. pylori infection. The salted food intake increases so if you look up here, you can see that salted food intake increases H. pylori infection, but salted food intake can also independently, without infection, increase risk of developing gastric cancer. The reverse is not true. So having an H. pylori infection does not make you more likely to eat or desire salted food. There's just, the correlation is only one direction. This was also repeated in a 2015 study of nearly 40,000 Japanese people who were followed for 10 to 20 years with no history of cancer or cardiovascular disease. Those who consumed 3 to 4 or more bowls of miso soup a day had 60% higher risk of gastric cancer development. And this is an interesting finding because, as you will see later in this presentation, we are going to discuss the benefits of soy in preventing cancers. And so we will talk about why, what are the benefits, or how can we determine miso soup consumption, or what is a safe miso soup consumption? What can we look for with miso soup? So this is a evaluating specific factors in development of colorectal cancer risk. And you can see that anything that has a p-value, so in this far right-hand part of the slide, anything with a p-value of less than 0.01 is considered significant. And so you can see that when the number is higher for the normal group, it means it is a protective food. For instance, vegetable intake being greater than 300 grams a day, 61% of people without colorectal cancer are consuming that amount, greater than 300 grams a day, versus 34% with colorectal cancer. If the number is lower, that means it is a food that may increase your risk. So for instance, cooking in lard oil, the 26% of those without colorectal cancer versus 60% with colorectal cancer. So as you look at this slide, it looks as though cooking in lard and consumption of pickled foods more than 7 times per week could increase risk of developing colorectal cancer. Whereas cooking with vegetable oil, vegetable consumption greater than 300 grams per day, fruit consumption greater than or equal to 200 grams per day, bean and nut consumption greater than 25 grams per day, and egg consumption greater than 280 grams per week could be protective against the development of colorectal cancer. What I will say about this study is it is based off of a food frequency questionnaire where the people that are involved will be asked, how often do you eat fruit? And so there's no designation of type of fruit or type of vegetable to know if there's a specific vegetable or fruit that's more beneficial. And it doesn't tease out that either. So we don't know if, if they had all been eating apples and pears versus blackberries and blueberries, is there a difference? And it's also obviously reliant on patient or people's own self-evaluation. So I always take these food frequency questionnaire type results with a little bit of grace, pardon the pun, because it is reliant on self-reported information. But these numbers are still statistically significant, and definitely no one's going to tell you not to eat fruits and vegetables. So just or beans and nuts or things like that. So just kind of a interesting observation in this study here. All right. So protective dietary traits. So we've talked a little bit about some of the things that can increase the risk of developing those cancers. These are three specific ones that I wanted to address today. As you know, the topic is the traditional Asian diet. And so I wanted to evaluate foods that may be traditionally consumed more often among an Asian population than the general public. So we're going to look at each of these three, the allium vegetables, the soy, and the green tea individually. So allium vegetables are things such as garlic, onion, shallot, leeks, scallions, and chives. And we have seen through a number of studies that increased consumption of these can decrease the risk of most cancers, specifically colorectal, gastric, and head and neck cancers. And for many years, this has been questioned by researchers. There is a study that was just released just this last month, so just actually in June of 2022, that shows that allium vegetable intake is inversely associated with gastric cancer risk, and it's strongest, the relationship or the association is strongest among Asian populations versus European. So the increased intake actually decreases the risk of development of gastric cancers among Asian populations at a greater rate than it does among European populations. There was some question about garlic supplementation or supplementation in general of any of these. And the studies that have been done that I've included here are included with the cooked form of these vegetables. They have not shown any benefit with supplemental intake. So cooked vegetables tend to promote the best benefit. The green tea extract. So EGCG is the active compound in green tea, and green tea consumption in non-smokers is associated with a decreased risk of colorectal cancer. That is from the Shanghai Men's Health Study. The question asked was, have you ever drank tea at least 3 times per week for more than 6 consecutive months? So 3 cups of tea, at least 3 cups of tea, per week for more than 6 consecutive months. And that was associated with a reduced risk in colorectal cancer among Chinese men aged 40 to 74 years. The risk decreased as the amount of green tea consumption increased. So for each 2-gram incremental increase, which is approximately the equivalent of 1 tea bag, it was associated with a 12% reduction risk. There was no association among smokers, so only protective in non-smoker populations. Here's another interesting study that was done on green tea. So this slide shows other studies that were done in mouse models. So mice with prostate cancer tumors were treated with EGCG alone versus the anti-cancer drugs alone, the two anti-cancer drugs being paclitaxel and docetaxel, and then the combination of the two. Okay, so if you look at the numbers listed, you will see the percent of tumor volume remaining after the treatment, and that's what these numbers represent. The tumor volume down here, the tumor volume remaining. So you can see that the combination of ECGC and anti-cancer drugs completely eliminated the cell lines when used in combination, and the tumor volume was reduced by 70.3%. So this is the opposite, 70.3%. So that's the remaining there. When converted into the amount of ECGC, that would be the equivalent of what was given to the mice. It's about 24 to 36 ounces of green tea daily, or 1.37 to 2.05 grams of EGCG daily. The interesting thing, and the thing that I will talk about in the next slide, is that this is on a mouse model. The other thing is that it is an interesting finding to see that the alone effect is actually a slightly higher than the cancer drugs alone in the mouse model. As well as, but the overall effect seems to be more beneficial when combined with the cancer fighting drugs. And I always will, kind of make sure that you're, I guess, not taking this and running with this, because some people may know people that are on paclitaxel or docetaxel. First of all, this is a mouse study. Second of all, it was done for prostate cancer cell lines. And so not done in any other, not reproduced in any other kind of cancer cell lines. So just a note on that. This is kind of the limitations of this green tea research. So human-based studies. So we looked at cell line, we looked at mouse models, we looked at the food frequency questionnaires. We haven't gone and put green tea into humans and seen what happens as far as tumor burden remaining. So the review, this study that I have listed down here is a review study that evaluated 142 human studies and nearly 1.1 million participants. And the majority of those studies did find a beneficial effect of green tea consumption. However, the sample sizes were very small, or the duration of the study was limited, meaning that the research had limitations that made it less or non-significant. So the interesting thing is that they do acknowledge that the majority of the studies were conducted among Asian populations and have found that the benefits of green tea intake among those populations may be protective, but that protection cannot be suggested for all populations. So they don't have a blanket recommendation for green tea consumption, but it has been shown to be beneficial. The next one is isoflavones, and these are, sorry, I'm going to find my find where I'm at with my slides here. These are primarily found in whole food products containing soy. So miso, tofu, mung bean, tempeh, kudzu root, alfalfa sprout. And we have found that soy isoflavone consumption has decreased the risk of breast cancer incidence and recurrence in Asian populations at a intake of approximately 10 milligrams or more of isoflavone per day. And we'll look at what isoflavone content looks like here in just a second. I will say that there had been for a number of years when I first started practicing, now it's been a couple decades ago, there had been a concern about soy intake in breast cancer because of the phytoestrogens that are in soy mimicking estrogen in the human body. And when you have a breast cancer that is what we call estrogen receptor positive, they were concerned that the soy phytoestrogen that's found in soy could exacerbate or grow those tumors. Since then, so this has been in the last 10, 15 years, we have learned that that is not the case, that they do not function in the same way as the human estrogen does, and that they actually are protective as well against breast cancer development. The other thing I want to point out on this is that this is not only for prevention, but also secondary prevention. So if you've had breast cancer, increased intake of soy isoflavones can actually reduce your risk of getting breast cancer again. So you can see the milligrams. So remember we said then the number of isoflavones we're looking for is more than 10 milligrams per day. And you can kind of see the averages per 100 milligrams of food here. So 100 milligrams being about the equivalent of a cup, basically. The interesting one here is this miso. So you can see that the average isoflavone content of miso is 41, but the range is very large. And it goes back to that initial slide about the consumption of miso soup, which what we have found is that the longer the fermentation process, the higher the isoflavone content and the less sodium salt content that the miso has. So the longer that the miso is fermented for, the better in being protective. When it has this lower isoflavone content, it is less protective. And you can also see as you go through here that the more processed a food is, say soy sauce, or like a soy-based meat, veggie meat, the lower the isoflavone content. So the less processed, the better. All right, so those are some of the protective dietary traits. The other thing, the other big reference point that we use for cancer prevention and prevention of recurrence is the American Cancer Society and American Institute for Cancer Research diet guidelines. And those are outlined as getting 30 grams of fiber daily from food. Again, we'll talk about supplements in here in a minute. But the benefits of having fiber-rich foods go beyond just the fiber content. Those foods tend to also be very high in antioxidant and phytonutrient content, which are also protective against cancer. And that goes into this 2 cups of non-starchy vegetables and fruit daily. Starchy vegetables would be things like potato, corn, peas, winter squash. There's nothing wrong with any of those. But the non-starchy vegetables have a lower caloric content with increased nutrient content. So non-starchy vegetables would be things like zucchini, peppers, beets, carrots, leafy greens, celery, cucumber, radish, to name a few. Varieties key, including dark green, red, and orange fruits and vegetables for the highest antioxidant content. One of the things that I will say is when you're evaluating them at the store, the deeper the color, the higher the antioxidant content is. So really looking for those super ripe fruits and vegetables. Limit consumption of red and processed meat to 12 to 18 ounces daily. Less is better. Processed meat would be things like smoked meats, cured meats, including deli meat, bacon, and sausage. And red meat also includes beef and game meats, so things like elk or deer meat as well. Limit consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, and then avoid alcohol. If you do drink, limit 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men. A drink equivalent is, or 1 drink equivalent would be a 12-ounce beer, a 5-ounce wine, or 1.5 ounces of some sort of distilled spirit. All right, supplements. So what does the research show about supplements in comparison to real food for effectiveness and preventative use? So the AICR, which is the American Institute of Cancer Research, cautions against supplement use for cancer prevention. And if supplements are necessary, recommendations should be made by a registered dietitian nutritionist. Most vitamins and minerals do not require supplementation unless there is an underlying need. And that need should be evaluated by a professional. It's not to say you shouldn't take a multivitamin, but you should focus on adequate dietary intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains to meet those needs if possible. If it is not possible, for whatever reason, whether that be a digestive issue, personal preference, food allergies, that's when the supplement use comes into play, but that really does need to be evaluated by a professional. We, as a nutrition professional, I'm going to look at some of these nutrition related labs that will help me to determine if supplementation is necessary. And I normally would not evaluate at a single lab on a single lab result, except with the exception of something like vitamin D and vitamin B12. The other ones I would want multiple lab values, as that sometimes they can fluctuate for various reasons. If you're in active treatment, these are all labs that we will be checking and monitoring pretty frequently, and advising about supplementation. A couple words of caution. So the American Institute of Cancer Research has cautioned against it because there have been studies that show oversupplementation can actually increase risk of some cancers. And so they are hesitant to recommend that across the board. All right. There are 2 exceptions to this, to the supplementation. So these are supplements, and again, I would say they can be classified as supplements. They are not your traditional vitamin mineral, but these are things that are not necessarily considered food. The first is curcumin or turmeric, and the second is turkey tail mushroom. So curcumin or turmeric has some reported anti-cancer benefits. It's recommended that it's included in a diet as part of a varied diet. Supplement use is still not validated in research. So I see a lot of turmeric supplements out there. I would recommend utilizing turmeric in your cooking. Turmeric needs 2 things with it to become bioactive in the body. It needs black pepper and it needs a source of fat. So when you are cooking, make sure that you include those things. And as little as a teaspoon of turmeric a day has been shown to be beneficial for its anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. The human studies of curcumin supplement are still ongoing. So again, jury's out on that. The studies that have been conducted have been on cell lines, so cancer cell lines that are in a laboratory, like in a petri dish, as opposed to with human consumption and measuring outcomes. Turkey tail mushroom. So products using turkey tail mushroom are already currently approved as adjunct therapies in China and Japan for patients with cancer who are already receiving chemo or radiation. Numerous studies have and clinical trials confirm that turkey tail mushroom inhibits the growth of cancer cells in both cell and human settings, as well as decreases cancer treatment related adverse side effects such as fatigue, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, and pain. Again, most of these studies are done as adjunct therapy studies. So they are using this not as a standalone treatment, but in conjunction with traditional chemotherapy, radiation treatments, immunotherapy treatments as well. All right. So while I wish that I could be an on-call resource for each and every one of you, that's unfortunately not realistic. It would be lovely, but it's not realistic for me or my family. However, I do want to leave you with some tools to help navigate sort of the online world and your own personal world of medical advice. So I have made up this list of 5 signs of what I call nutrition quackery. And quackery is a term I use to describe something that's not reliable or valid. The information can be super well intentioned, but it's usually not research based and oftentimes can be very biased. There are blanket statements made about things that should be more individualized and things like that. So the 5 signs that I have listed, the first one is making definitive statements, such as one product does it all, satisfaction guaranteed, sugar causes cancer. So science is constantly evolving and things are rarely black and white, just as I've talked about in the research that we've looked at today. Statements should be made using words like may, could, possibly, rather than cause-effect statements that are definitive. A second sign is that the person has no qualifications. So when I am looking at something, reading an article, listening to a speaker, what is that person's background? Oftentimes, it could be you could be reading a journalist's work who uses quotes from experts and then formulates their own story to sell an article. Also, one thing I will note is that any person can call themselves a nutritionist. There are some certifications available to be called a nutritionist, but it is not a legally bound credential, meaning that there is no liability for that person. Only registered dietitians have a credential with specific qualifications and ongoing oversight to maintain that credential. A third one is personal testimony, and this is probably the biggest one and probably sometimes the most difficult to ignore, as when someone says that they have cancer or that they're trying a new diet, it's very easy to get wrapped up in their story and say, well, if it worked for them, it will work for me as well. So it's a big one because you're going to meet people that have had cancer or have relatives or friends that had cancer, and they may even be undergoing the same treatment as you. They may have the same risk factors of developing a certain cancer as you, but everyone has unique needs and issues regarding their genetics, their previous medical history. And so it's important that you don't generalize one person's experience to an entire population of people. It's not to say that you can't try something, but it's just to be cautious about what somebody else is doing. The fourth one is trying to sell you something. Obviously, if they're promoting a product that you have to have, that's a big red flag. And then the final one is no references or backup claims. So if someone makes a definitive statement and then says something like studies show, but you don't see a link to the study or they don't specifically reference a study, I would question this and find out where are their sources, where are they coming from? Here are a few of my favorite science-based backed nutrition resources that are specific for cancer. And I will go through each of these briefly. So PubMed is a online database that has links to any research study that has been done and published. And I'm going to see if I can get this to open up, maybe. Oh, it's not going to open up. So when you go into PubMed, maybe it will now. When you go into PubMed, it will bring you to a screen like this. So it's pubmed.gov. You can type in anything that you want. And I look up allium, vegetables, and gastric cancer. And when I search it, it will show all of the studies that have been done that include those search terms. These are all peer-reviewed journal articles, and you can really search a number of different things here. Let me see if I'm going to be able to go back. There we go. Okay. The next one is the American Institute of Cancer Research. They are a great resource as well. They have a lot of information pertaining to diet and nutrition. They have, in the last few years, published what is known as the New American Plate Guidance. And they are recommending this plate that you see here. And I'm sorry that that's so grainy. It is not a vegetarian diet, but they call it a plant-based diet where a third or less of your plate is made up of animal-based proteins. They have found that this has been one of the most protective diets against cancer development and prevention of recurrence as well. They also have a number of support groups available on their website for improving diet, improving activity level, all the things that you could possibly think of. It's a really great resource. The American Cancer Society is another great resource. They have a page called Eat Healthy and Get Active, similar to the American Institute of Cancer Research. Definitely another good supportive tool. For specific guidelines around pancreatic cancer, the PanCan, Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, and again, they have diet and nutrition recommendations specific for pancreatic cancer patients and their families. They have a fabulous book that's a cookbook that is free to people that if you go on their website, you can order and it will be delivered to you. I know that the dietitians at the Providence Cancer Institute use it often. This is a great resource, the Memorial Sloan Kettering About Herbs page. And it allows you to go in and search any supplement or herb. So you could look up turkey tail mushroom. It will show purported uses. It will show potential drug interactions. It will also grade the level of reliability for the purported uses. So has it been shown in research to actually do what it supposedly says it does? And it is constantly being updated. It's again, another resource that I use personally all the time for supplements that I have not heard of. They also have it is fantastic for supplements that are in other languages as well. So if you have something that you take that is from another country, oftentimes you can find it in their database as well. And then the recipe websites that I usually will turn patients onto are these two. Rebecca Katz is actually a cancer survivor herself, as well as a dietitian. It is fantastic. She has a great website with lots of helpful hints, but also great recipes. And then this Healthy Cooking, the Cook for Your Life, is from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center up in Seattle, and they too have recipes. These ones are actually outlined by symptom. So people that are going through active treatment, this is a really beneficial website for that. Here is a list of all of the research. You guys should have access to this presentation at the conclusion of this presentation today, and all of these studies that were referenced throughout the presentation are listed here as well. All right, so that was fast and furious, and we're going to go ahead and take some questions.
Grace, I just saw a couple of the questions in our chat box. And one first question was that came from Patricia about she has question about the I have to look for.
I have a question about soy.
Yeah.
I have a question about soy. So I've got metastatic cancer, and so does soy help in a survival rate? In other words, length of longevity.
So the benefits of soy are mostly for prevention of like primary prevention, and then prevention of recurrence. I don't know of any data for longevity. I do know that it is also, and it is, most of the research has been specific to breast cancers.
That's what I have.
Yeah, and there is some data on the recurrence rate, and I can't extrapolate that to longevity. I will say there is nothing to say that it is harmful in metastatic breast cancer. We recommend soy intake for all of our breast cancer patients, regardless of where they are in the kind of treatment continuum.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
We have another question about your PowerPoint presentation slides, whether I will be able to share that with them. So
yes,
okay,
absolutely.
And then if you just send me or writing your name in this chat box, or because I need your email address, so maybe you can contact me, and then I will write my email in my chat box, so you can send me email, then request for the this PowerPoint slide. Okay, and then any other questions?
So I'm curious about turmeric also, and the difference between the supplements. To me, the supplements seem the same as what you get from off the shelf for putting in your cooking. So what's the difference, or why wouldn't supplements work?
So I guess the thing that is, I don't know that supplements would not work. I think that the difference is that the studies that at least the ones that I have evaluated, have been done using the actual spice itself as opposed to a supplement. So the research on turmeric supplementation is still ongoing. There is no definitive research out there. So it's not to say, and again, it's not to say that it wouldn't be as beneficial. It's just that there isn't the research to support it, as well as there is research out there on actual turmeric consumption through the spice and cooking.
And you said it needed a couple of things to activate, and I forgot to write those down. What was
Yeah,
that?
black pepper, and most of the supplements that I've seen have it. It sometimes it's called like Piper Sane. It's not. It doesn't say black pepper on the ingredients, but
Yeah.
black pepper and fat.
Yeah.
So a source of fat. So if you're cooking, cook with oil, or using peanut butter or something like that. So
That's good. Thank you.
yeah.
I'd like to remind everyone that we have a post-evaluation link in the chat box, and the Providence Cancer Institute education program. They really appreciate you fill out this, complete this survey. Yeah, we will also really appreciate it. So if you can fill out the survey, that would be great. All right. Any other questions? I have a couple questions, Grace.
Sure.
One is that you mentioned about the salted food, like salted fish, and so what are the best way? If many of people enjoy the fish. What are some of your suggestion or recommendation to best way to consume this salt fish?
So the minimizing the salted fish intake is probably your best bet. I would say that it is a inverse correlation, meaning the lower the consumption, the less risk. So the higher consumption, greater risk. So minimizing the risk is minimizing the intake. And it's the salting and that preserving process that really creates the issue. So if there is a way to preserve the fish without salting it in any way, that would be the other option.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe just maybe cutting down the amount, but also maybe washing thoroughly.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then steam it.
and I think the salt is an independent independent issue as well, but the salting, like the preserving process with salt itself, actually creates cancerous compounds, and I don't know that if you're washing it, if those come off as well. So yeah, I would say minimize intake is probably your best bet.
So maybe fish sauce is kind of similar also?
Yes, yeah. I would say the concentration is probably, the amount that you're using of fish sauce, the concentration is probably significantly less than a actual salted fish, itself. So.
Yeah. So if you look at the American diet, like American food, what are some of the food that maybe we need to really watch out for cutting down the salt?
So I will say processed foods use salt for preservation. That is how we do it in America. It's how things stay on the shelf for years at a time and don't go bad. And so when you are evaluating, and I wish I had an example here, but when you're looking at a nutrition facts label, so the labels that come on all packaged goods, the nutrition facts label, all of them are required to show sodium content. I will say that anything that has a sodium content, when you look at the nutrition facts label, and on the far right part of that is a column that says percent daily value. If the percent daily value of sodium is 20% or higher, that would be considered a high sodium food. It would be one that I would use very limited, limited amounts of. So no more than probably one serving every other day, basically, would be my recommendation with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another question. If someone asks and say organic versus non-organic, What are some of the things that we need to consider when we talk about organic and, just regular?
So I guess they're organic versus non-organic is tough because there are actually quite a few non-organic fruits and vegetables that are out there that are probably going to have similar nutrient profiles to the organic ones. A lot of it has to do with, and I'm talking fruits and vegetables. So I would say that it has to do with length of time on a store shelf more than anything. So it can be grown in great soil, limited pesticide use, all of those things. But if it sits on a store shelf for a week, the nutrient content or the antioxidant content has started to deplete. Washing most fruits and vegetables is going to get rid of a lot of those pesticide residues, if there are pesticide residues, and conventionally grown. If I were going to spend money on organic, I would do it on mostly animal products. So things like meat and dairy, as I feel like the benefit of that is probably higher than the organic benefits, or the benefits of the organic product is probably higher than the benefit of the organic fruit and vegetable. If you have, it's tough because I would say that you're still going to get benefits from consuming fruits and vegetables. Fiber is still going to be in those things, whether they're organically grown or conventionally grown. And there are a lot of actually really well-grown conventionally products too that just have not been labeled organic because of the process to do so.
Okay. I have one question in the chat box. How about the fermented foods are good for our body?
Yes.
Benefit.
So yeah, definitely. And so I know that there was a slide about pickled vegetables and pickled vegetable intake. And the biggest concern with that is the development of the fungus or mold. So if you are practicing like safe practices for fermenting those foods, so things like kimchi or kombucha or sauerkraut or kefir, things like that, those products are super beneficial. It's if they are opened and exposed to air, that they can develop those things and become a risk. So fermented foods are absolutely beneficial. Anything that you can do to get healthy bacteria in your body are beneficial. I will caution that when patients are on immunosuppressing treatments, we do often kind of evaluate the use of those depending on how like the processing of them, or if patients are having gastrointestinal issues, because they do provide bacteria, and sometimes we may overstimulate the gastrointestinal tract when it's already being overstimulated during treatment. So
that means that can cause more diarrhea. Maybe.
Correct. If you're already having diarrhea, it could potentially exacerbate that problem during treatment, especially. Yeah.
And then the other thing is that we have a cancer patient who is undergoing the chemotherapy, and then they have a little bit of a hesitance to eat meat and protein. And so what is your advice for them?
So I will say that protein needs do increase in active treatment for most people. And baseline, we would recommend at least 1.2 grams per kilogram per day of protein. Protein is found in a number of foods beyond meats and beyond animal foods. for that matter. So the vegetable-based proteins, the things like tofu, beans, even grains like quinoa or some fortified products, so things like protein shakes or protein cereals. There are a number of ways to get protein in. A lot of it is based on personal preference. So there are numbers of protein powders out there that are unflavored now. So you can usually find some way to meet those protein needs. Mm-hmm. Without using meat. And oftentimes, you know, I would actually somewhat encourage that. I wouldn't say you have to avoid meat completely, but to find the majority of your protein intake without using meat during treatment is probably not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the protein powder is okay to use it.
Yes, absolutely. And again, the protein powders range as well. So you have protein powders from like whey protein powders that are based from animals, but you also have pea protein powders or hemp protein powders that are vegetable based and still high quality.
Mm-hmm. And many of our clients doesn't know how to asking for diet evaluation through their treatment providers. So maybe it's how it's easy to access or reaching out to a dietitian and getting the personalized meal plan or nutrition.
So if you are not in active treatment, I would say ask your primary healthcare provider for a referral. Or you can call the dietitians directly. So I know Providence St. Vincent's has an outpatient nutrition clinic that does have dietitians available for any condition. If you are in active treatment, the best advice that I would have is talk to the oncologist. If you're not getting anywhere with your oncologist, your doctor, talk to the nursing staff. The nursing staff and the dietitians are very tight, and we get a lot of referrals from nurses who have conversations with patients who say, I don't feel like eating, I'm losing weight, I have questions about what I should be eating. They are the best resource to get you to a dietitian. I will say that the cancer institutes between Newburgh, St. Vincent's, Providence, Portland, there are only 2 dietitians right now. So they may not be in the clinic on the day that you're there, but they will definitely get a message to be seeing you if you're interested. So, and if you're not in the Providence system, have your oncologist or care provider send a referral to a dietitian. They all should have access to dietitians through some network.
Mm-hmm. I have many questions. I hope that helps to our audience. But before we end this presentation, do you have any more of the question? This is a good chance.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna just call like 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Raise your hand. No. Okay. We have a message from the audience that they are writing a thank you note to Grace, and we are so grateful to have you this afternoon. And I think this information is really helpful for a lot of people. And I know that this is just beginning, and I really think we should have, our audience should have starting to just see what they are eating, and then maybe watch their diets, and then they have more interest in learning about the nutrition. I think
Yes.
that will be really key for the survivorship and preventing recurrent of
Yes.
the cancer. So, we really appreciate Thuy Tran, program manager of the Providence Cancer Institute, to coordinate inviting Grace to us this afternoon. So we are really grateful and thank you. And I hope you all enjoyed. And please make sure you complete the survey by clicking the online, and then you can answer the questions and link. So we really appreciate it. And I hope that you all have a happy holiday weekend, and be safe. Watch your diet during the barbecue. Adding more vegetables.
Eat lots of watermelon and berries. That's a good advice.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Grace. And thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Twin.